The best way to understand what's really going on in the world today is to journey back in time and dig up the ancient secrets of the past. Those ancient secrets had been hidden by the ruling class beneath the shifting sands of Egypt for more than 4,000 years. Historian travel guides like Josephus, Herodotus, and Manetho, as well as writers like David Rohl, Ralph Ellis, and Niels Peter Lemke, provide flashlights into the past. The earliest remains of human life on Earth were discovered in Africa. The ancient Egyptians kept detailed records of their culture and history in tombs, in temples, and on pottery, using pictures and writings called hieroglyphics. Archaeology experts have found absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Hebrew Jews lived as slaves in Egypt or of their exodus from Egypt. The plain truth is that Moses didn't lead Hebrew slaves out of Egypt any more than Charlton Heston did. So who was that bearded man with a magical staff named Moses? There is not one shred of archaeological evidence for the existence of Moses or of any of the Bible's main cast of Hebrew characters, from Abraham to Jacob to Joseph to King David to King Solomon. There is, however, plenty of evidence for the existence of Egyptian pharaohs who these biblical characters are based on. The Bible's Old Testament has carefully covered up the connection between the Egyptian pharaohs and the Hebrew patriarchs by mixing up historical facts with myths and legends. The job of archaeology experts and historians is to separate fact from fiction. Modern archaeologists have confirmed that the Hebrews were not a race of people as once thought. They were a Semitic and Asiatic class of foreign workers who migrated into Egypt from neighboring lands in search of work as craftsmen and builders. As their population multiplied over hundreds of years, they contributed to Egyptian technology, worshipped Egyptian gods, intermarried with Egyptian nobility, and gradually rose to positions of power and wealth in Egypt. The Bible story of the Hebrew Jews begins with Abram, who was born north of Canaan in the town of Ur around 2055 BC. Abram married his beautiful sister Sarai. At God's command, the incestuous couple changed their names to the Egyptian names of Abraham and Sarah and migrated to Egypt. Once in Egypt, Abraham turned his sister wife Sarah over to the Pharaoh as his harem sex slave and was rewarded with gold and silver. Abraham received covenants or promises from God. God promised to make his name great and to make a great nation for him. God also made a circumcision covenant with Abraham, commanding him to mark the flesh of his people and slaves by cutting off the protective foreskin of their penises. Circumcision was a painful barbaric custom that was introduced into Egypt near this same time and has survived to this day. It is the unnecessary mutilation of the genitals of little boys and implies that God made a mistake in design. This mutilation custom has more to do with a mark of Hebrew ownership than with hygiene. In the continuing Bible story, Abraham married an Egyptian woman named Hagar because his sister wife Sarah couldn't conceive. But at age 90, Sarah finally gave birth to a son named Isaac. Following God's order to sacrifice his son, Abraham hog-tied Isaac and picked up a knife to kill him. Just as Abraham was about to plunge the knife into Isaac, he learned God was only kidding. Who was the ruling pharaoh that the Bible neglects to identify when Abraham and Sarah reached Egypt? His name was Amenemhet I, and he ruled Egypt from 1991 BC to 1962 BC. The name Amenemhet means Amen is the head. Besides Pharaoh Amenemhet and biblical Abraham living in the same place at the same time, is there any other evidence connecting biblical Abraham to Pharaoh Amenemhet I? According to Egyptian history, Pharaoh Amenemhet I was not of royal blood, and his family origin is unknown. Egyptology experts believe he seized the throne of Egypt after murdering Pharaoh Mentuhotep. In 1818, Antonio Lobolo made a revolutionary discovery that identified the biblical Abraham as an Egyptian pharaoh. During Lobolo's excavations in the Egyptian Valley of the Kings, he exhumed 11 Egyptian mummies along with rolls of papyri inscribed with hieroglyphic writings and drawings. One of those drawings was interpreted by Mormon Joseph Smith and his Egyptologists as Abraham sitting on the pharaoh's throne. Abraham's name was also deciphered on a roll of papyrus. Joseph Smith published his controversial findings in the Book of Abraham in 1842 and was murdered 2 years later. Today, the only Egyptian pyramid tomb forbidden to the public is the tomb of Pharaoh Amenemhet I, who many researchers now believe is the biblical Abraham. Why have Egyptologists never found the remains of Pharaoh Amenemhet I or of biblical Abraham? The best explanation is that their common remains are concealed inside the famous Ark of the Covenant. The Hollywood movie Raiders of the Lost Ark was about the search for the lost Ark of the Covenant. According to the Bible story, the tablets of the 10 Commandments given to Moses by God were stored inside the Ark. Egyptian artifacts tell the true story about what's really inside the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is, in fact, an Egyptian canopic chest, where the dried organs of royal kings and pharaohs were stored, not the 10 Commandments. Why did the Hebrews call their royal canopic chest the Ark of the Covenant? Because the name signifies the covenants or promises that God made with Abraham. Would the Hebrews carry the Ark of the Covenant into battle to kill and steal if it really contained commandments like, "Thou shalt not kill or steal"? The best explanation is that the Ark contained the remains of their ancestral leader who led them into battle. Biblical Hebrew rulers like King Solomon broke all of the commandments, just like today's rulers who make and break laws and commandments to exploit the obedient masses. The evidence shows that the ancestral patriarch of the Hebrew Jews is Amenemhet I, and that his biblical name is Abraham. Since Pharaoh Amenemhet worshipped the god Amun, are Amun and the biblical God the same God? Michelangelo's Vatican painting of God depicts God as an angry, bearded white man. God's words, actions, and deeds in the Bible's Old Testament show God's extreme favoritism for the Hebrews generally and for Hebrew males in particular. By today's standards, that behavior is considered both racist and sexist. God admits to being a jealous God who approves of ritual human and animal sacrifice as proof that he is obeyed and worshipped above all other gods. He terrorizes, punishes, and kills the enemies of the Hebrews. He uses his godly power to kill Egyptian children and spread plagues, famines, pestilence, and darkness. He magically turns staffs into deadly venomous snakes and turns the Nile River into blood. Like the biblical god, the god Amun-Ra also turns the Nile River into blood in the Egyptian myth of Hathor. The Bible God's opinion of humanity is that all human beings are sinful children who are all born into sin. Since his words and deeds describe an angry, violent, and jealous God, are the biblical God and the ancient Egyptian god Amun, whose name is repeated over and over in the Bible, one and the same God? What is an Egyptian pyramid and the eye of the Egyptian god Horus doing on the American $1 bill? Why have Washington, London, and the Vatican erected towering obelisk monuments honoring the pagan Egyptian god Amun-Ra? In the next Bible episode, Abraham's son Isaac, who Abraham almost stabbed to death, grows up to father twin boys named Jacob and Esau. A murderous rivalry develops between the twins, and Jacob flees to a place known today as Bethel in Israel. He lays his head down to rest on a large, smooth stone and dreams of a stairway reaching to heaven like a ladder. The stairway in Jacob's dream describes the step pyramids built by Egyptian pharaohs like ladders reaching to heaven. The symbolic stone where the Hebrew Jacob laid his head thousands of years ago in Bethel is alternately called the Stone of Jacob, the Stone of Destiny, and the Stone of Scone. Today, the symbolic stone can be found underneath the British throne chair on top of the symbolic step pyramid where the Queen and other British monarchs have been crowned.
The battered oak coronation throne, on which every English monarch has been crowned, is built over the Stone of Scone.
As the Bible story continues, God promises Jacob that a nation and a company of nations shall come from him, and kings will spring from him. Jacob marries 2 of his girl cousins and fathers 12 sons. As Jacob ages, Joseph becomes his favorite son, and Dan becomes his venomous son. Jacob eventually takes his sons and his Hebrew clan and migrates from Canaan into Egypt. This Hebrew migration into Egypt closely parallels Egyptian history when the Semitic Hyksos migrants overthrew the Egyptian pharaohs and seized the throne of Egypt. One of the Semitic Hyksos leaders who became king of Egypt was Jacober. Since Jacober is the Aramean name for Jacob, Egyptology experts interpret this as factual evidence that the biblical Jacob and the Hyksos king Jacober were one and the same. Historical records show that the Semitic Hyksos kings ruled Egypt for over 100 years. The Egyptian people rebelled against these Semitic kings and pushed them into northern Egypt. By 1500 BC, a peace agreement was reached between the Egyptians and the Semitic Hyksos, which allowed the Hyksos people to leave Egypt peaceably and move to Palestine and Jerusalem in the Egyptian-controlled land of Canaan. Their gradual and peaceful migration closely matches the Bible story of the Semitic Hebrew exodus from Egypt into Canaan in 1447 BC. According to the Bible story, when the Hebrews arrived in Canaan, they renamed it Israel and divided the land up into 12 tribal states, which they named after the sons of Jacob. Jacob's favorite son Joseph stayed behind in Egypt. Joseph hid his Hebrew identity by marrying an Egyptian wife and changing his name to the Egyptian name Zaphanath-Paneah, which means he who can reveal secrets. According to the Bible, Joseph ruled Egypt as the Pharaoh's top vizier and bought up all the private land in Egypt from the starving people. Then he taxed them out of 1/5 of their income. Was Joseph the chief vizier of Pharaoh and Moses, who negotiated the peace agreement allowing the Semitic Hebrew Hyksos people to settle in the Egyptian-controlled land of Canaan? The Hebrew connection to the Egyptian pharaohs is further revealed in the biblical story of Moses.
Many years ago, in a land called Egypt, there lived a very mean king. Egyptian kings were called pharaohs.
The story begins with the Egyptian pharaoh ordering the deaths of all Hebrew baby boys.
Oh no! They won't get my baby. I'll find some way to save him.
The Hebrew mother of baby Moses tries to save him by hiding him in the bulrushes on the Nile River.
What's that? A baby!
When baby Moses is found by the princess daughter of the Egyptian pharaoh, the princess decides to raise him as her own son. Moses now has two mothers, a royal Egyptian princess mother and a non-royal Hebrew mother who hides her identity as Moses' Hebrew mother, gets a job as a servant at the palace, and helps the princess raise Moses. Why did the Bible omit the historical names of the pharaoh's princess daughter and the pharaoh? Their historical identities can be found by comparing the dates and events of the Bible story with factual Egyptian history. All dates followed by the letters BC count backwards to 0, which is the beginning of today's Christian calendar. Bible researchers have calculated the birth of Moses at around 1520 BC. The ruling pharaoh of Egypt at that time was Thutmose I, and his princess daughter was Hatshepsut. Egyptian history verifies that Princess Hatshepsut married her brother named Pharaoh Thutmose II. But when Hatshepsut couldn't produce a male heir to the throne, her brother husband chose a non-royal mistress named Isis to produce a male heir and named their son Thutmose III. Hatshepsut raised the boy as her own son, even though Isis was his real birth mother. The Bible story of Moses closely matches the factual Egyptian story of Thutmose III. Even the names Moses and Thutmose are almost identical. In the Bible story, Moses gives up his big chance to be the richest, most powerful ruler in the ancient world to become a lowly, poverty-stricken Hebrew laborer. But wouldn't becoming ruler of Egypt and Canaan have been the most intelligent way to help his fellow Hebrews? The historical facts show that's exactly what Thutmose III did. Once he grew up to become Pharaoh of Egypt, Thutmose III organized military campaigns with his mighty armies and chariots and defeated the enemies of the Hebrew Hyksos who had settled in Canaan. After his famous battle of Megiddo in Canaan in 1479 BC, Thutmose installed district governors in garrison cities throughout Canaan. Did Thutmose choose his district governors from the 12 Hebrew tribes named in the Bible? Is it just a coincidence that today's Temple of Isis, located on the Isle of Philae in Egypt, has the same name as Thutmose's mother? Some suggest that Thutmose III built the original Temple of Isis to honor his Hebrew mother, who was named after the goddess Isis, and that the temple was later restored by the Ptolemy kings. An inscription inside the temple identifies Isis as the mistress queen of Egypt. Today, Thutmose III is immortalized in stone in the corporate city-state of London, right next to his Egyptian obelisk honoring the pagan Egyptian god Amun. Why has UNESCO and others spent billions of dollars and years of labor moving the massive tonnage of the Isis temple and obelisks honoring the pagan god Amun? The answer lies within the continuing Bible story. After the Hebrews settled in the land of Canaan, they renamed it Israel. Their king, King David, reigned for 50 years. Egyptian history reveals that Pharaoh Susenes also ruled Canaan for nearly 50 years at the same time as the biblical King David. Both battled the same enemy called the Sea People or Philistines. Both King David and Pharaoh Susenes had sons with almost identical names, Solomon and Simon. The name of biblical King David's son, Solomon, means son for Saul, and O-M-O-N is an alternative spelling of Ammon. The name of Pharaoh Susenes' son, Simon, means son of Ammon. Simon and Solomon reigned at exactly the same time and fought the same enemies in Canaan, called the Mitanni, the Hittites, and the Philistines. Pharaoh Simon's documented battle with the Philistines in Palestine and his capture of the Canaan city of Gezer clearly proves an ancient alliance between the Egyptians and the Hebrews. The famous King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem means Temple of the Sun God Amun. According to the Talmud, King Solomon used the dark power of his magic ring to conjure up demons to help him build his temple. The temple became the center for sexual orgies, the worship of golden idols, and for animal and human sacrifices, including the sacrifice of infants and children. The biblical Ark of the Covenant was stored inside King Solomon's temple. The Ark had 4 gold rings built into its 4 corners, each representing the 4 corners of the earth over which descendants of the biblical Abraham are destined to rule. Since archaeologists claim the biblical King Solomon was no more real than the evil wizard Saruman from the movie Lord of the Rings, who built King Solomon's temple? The temple was most likely built by Pharaoh Simon, who King Solomon's fabled character was based on. Today, all that remains of the temple is the Wailing Wall, where Israel's Jews still gather to worship in Jerusalem. Did the Hebrew authors of the Bible's Old Testament really expect readers to believe that Abraham lived to be 175? That his sister wife Sarah gave birth at age 90? That Moses turned staffs into snakes and rivers into blood? Why did the Hebrew authors of the Bible omit all of the important historical names of Egyptian pharaohs? Why did they mix up historical fact with myths and legends? The big question is, what did they have to hide? Researchers of both Bible and Egyptian history have concluded that the Hebrew authors of the Bible covered up the fact that the Hebrews and the Egyptians shared the same royal bloodline. But why? Why the cover-up? Because after the Egyptian people forced the Hebrew Hyksos kings out of Egypt, the only way the Hebrews could continue ruling Egypt was to hide their Hebrew identity from the Egyptian people. They did that by changing their Hebrew names to Egyptian names and intermarrying with Egyptian royalty, just like the biblical Joseph did. By hiding their Hebrew identity, the Hebrews continued to rule Egypt secretly as Egyptian royalty. They worshipped Egyptian gods, followed Egyptian laws, and violated Jewish Hebrew laws. This meant they had to hide their Hebrew identity not just from the Egyptian people, but from the Hebrew people as well. They had to keep their royal Hebrew Egyptian identity and their worship of Amun hidden within royal power circles and secret societies, just as they have done to this day. The world's biggest and best-kept secret is that the descendants of the Hebrew pharaohs of Egypt have ruled throughout history. Over the millennia, they have left oceans of blood in their wake. They have murdered, cheated, slaughtered, robbed, colonized, and enslaved to fulfill their biblical covenants for an eternal throne and one world empire. Today, Queen Elizabeth II is the head of state of the great nation of the Hebrew Covenant called Great Britain. Her genealogy chart, according to the College of Heralds in London, traces her blue bloodline back to Abraham, whom many modern scholars believe to be the Egyptian pharaoh, Amenemhet I. By connecting 22 dots, the true Hebrew and royal Egyptian identity of Queen Elizabeth II comes into focus. Number 1. What is the stone of Jacob, a Hebrew patriarch, doing beneath the Queen's throne chair? Number 2. Why was the Queen crowned at her coronation ceremony on top of a symbolic Egyptian step pyramid? Number 3. The monarch's crown has 12 stones at the base, each representing the 12 Hebrew tribes. The 12 stones of the 12 tribes were also worn on the breastplate of Hebrew high priests in Canaan. Number 4. The Union Jack represents the reunion of the United Kingdom of the 12 tribes of Jacob, or Jacob. The Union Jack is red, white, and blue, the same colors as the 3 crowns of Egypt. Number 5. The royal scepter originates in ancient Egypt and was carried by the Egyptian god Amun and by Egyptian pharaohs, who called themselves the Son of God. The royal scepter is now carried by pharaonic descendant Queen Elizabeth II. Her scepter contains the world's largest cut diamond, called the Star of Africa. Number 6. The Queen's punishing flail or whip is partially hidden under her arm. The flail or whip also originates with the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Number 7. The symbol of the bee can be found within the Queen's royal wardrobe. In ancient Egypt, bees were the symbol of Egyptian royalty, as well as the symbol of Egypt. Number 8. The symbols on the British coat of arms reveal Britain's Hebrew origin. According to the Bible, the harp symbolizes the Hebrew King David. The biblical lion and unicorn holding up the shield symbolize the nation of Israel. The motto, Dieu et mon droit, means God and my right, indicating the divine right of the British monarch to an eternal throne. Number 9. The headdress worn by judges and the Queen's high-ranking officials originate in ancient Egypt. Number 10. Kilts, like the one worn by Prince Charles, originate with the Egyptian pharaohs who wore white kilts. Number 11. The hymn, Zadok the Priest, written by Handel, was performed at the Queen's coronation in 1952. Zadok the Priest was the biblical priest who anointed the Hebrew King Solomon while the people cried, "God save King Solomon! Long live King Solomon! May the king live forever!"
God save Queen Elizabeth! Long live Queen Elizabeth! May the Queen live forever!
Number 12. During the coronation ceremony, the Queen turns to face the four corners of the globe. The orb carried by the Queen represents the globe over which the monarch rules. Number 13. The monarch's coronation gifts of a rod, bracelets, and a ring are a reenactment of the Bible story of the Hebrews, Judah, and Tamar. Number 14. Royal jubilees originate in ancient Egypt. Egyptian pharaohs celebrated their jubilees after 30 years of rule. In pharaonic tradition, the Queen has celebrated both silver and golden jubilees. Number 15. Incest was practiced by ancient Egyptian royalty. Mothers married sons and brothers married sisters to keep the power and the money all in the family. Like their pharaonic ancestors, the British monarchy have a long history of incestuous inbreeding. Number 16. The corpses of deceased pharaohs were preserved and entombed beneath their pyramid temples. The corpses of 19 deceased British monarchs are also preserved in marble tomb slabs beneath the modern-day temple called Westminster Abbey. Number 17. The ancient pharaohs advertised their power with their image on coins and stone monuments. The power of the Queen worldwide is advertised with her image printed on more coins and stamps than any other head of state in history. Number 18. The structure of government in ancient Egypt was a step pyramid model, with the Grand Vizier and priesthood one step below the pharaoh. Today's monarchy reigns using a much more sophisticated pyramid model of authority. Number 19. The Pope's headdress is strikingly similar to the headdress of the Egyptian god Amun. His bent cross resembles the scepter of Amun. Number 20. Like the Egyptian pharaohs, British monarchs wear signet rings, which over the millennia have been passed down from their Hebrew ancestors. Number 21. The British Mint recently printed legal tender coins called the One True Ring and the Ring of Power. On one side of the coin is Queen Elizabeth II. On the flip side is the ring from Lord of the Rings. These legal tender coins printed by the British Mint raise the disturbing question, who is the real Lord of the Rings?
One ring to rule them all.
The inscription on the ring reads, "One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness of their ignorance, bind them." Number 22. The covenant that the biblical God gave to Abraham was a promise to make his name great and to make for him a great nation. Today, Great Britain is the only nation called great. In Hebrew, the word Britain literally means land of the covenant, and British means man of the covenant. How on earth did the Hebrew throne of ancient Egypt and Canaan end up in Great Britain under Queen Elizabeth II? Historically, a series of powerful invaders, the Philistines, Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians, conquered the land of Canaan, which the Hebrews called Israel. The Hebrew tribes of Manasseh and Dan joined forces and became the Macedonians or Macedonians. They fled to Greece with their gold and their riches. They wore white kilts like the Egyptian pharaohs, played goatskin bagpipes, adopted the Greek culture, and settled along the river Danube, which they named after the tribe of Dan. By 322 BC, their leader, Alexander the Great, reconquered Egypt and appointed his general Ptolemy I as the new Hebrew pharaoh of Egypt. Cleopatra was the last in a succession of Hebrew Ptolemy kings. Although Cleopatra is considered to be the last of the Egyptian pharaohs, author Ralph Ellis claims that Jesus was the last of the Hebrew pharaohs of Egypt. Jesus, a pharaoh? How is that possible? The historical facts show that the last pharaoh of Egypt was Ptolemy XV, who was nicknamed Caesarion or Little Caesar. Born in 47 BC, Caesarion was the son of two of the most famous parents in world history, Roman ruler Julius Caesar and Egyptian pharaoh Cleopatra. When Caesarion's mother, Cleopatra, proclaimed herself to be the reincarnation of the virgin goddess Isis, Caesarion became the son of a virgin mother goddess. When Caesarion's father, Julius Caesar, was elevated to the status of God by the Roman Senate, Caesarion was recognized as the son of God and heir to God's kingdom, the Roman Empire. Caesarion was also recognized as the son of God in Egypt after his mother named him co-ruling pharaoh of Egypt. Cleopatra declared Caesarion to be the king of kings at the age of 13 during the Donations of Alexandria ceremony in 34 BC. The face of history suddenly changed when Caesarion's father, Julius Caesar, was stabbed to death by his most trusted men. Octavian, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, swiftly seized power as the new Roman emperor. After Caesar's death, Cleopatra became romantically involved with a married commander from Caesar's army named Mark Antony. Mark Antony and Cleopatra parented 3 children, a twin boy and girl, followed by a second boy. Since Caesarion was Julius Caesar's son and the rightful heir to the Roman Empire, Cleopatra feared for his safety. When Octavian's mighty Roman army invaded Egypt, Cleopatra arranged for Caesarion's safe passage out of Egypt with her most trusted servants. Historians confirm that Cleopatra sent Caesarion to India. There are no historical records of Caesarion's fate, despite false rumors of his capture. Cleopatra's trusted servants who traveled with Caesarion became the boy's parent guardians. But who exactly were these parent guardians who Cleopatra entrusted her son to? Were their names Mary and Joseph by any chance? While Caesarion fled from Egypt with his parent guardians, Cleopatra and Mark Antony's 3 children were placed in the care of Mark Antony's wife. After suffering a crushing defeat against Octavian's invading Roman army, Mark Antony committed suicide by falling on his own sword. The devastated Cleopatra also committed suicide by a self-inflicted poisonous snake bite. While traveling undercover through Egypt with his parent guardians, Caesarion was forced to hide his identity and change his name. The Egyptian name for Jesus is Isu, which means the son of Isis. It can be found in Egyptian hieroglyphics. Matthew 2, verses 13 and 14 of the Bible tell a parallel story of the young child Jesus and his mother fleeing into Egypt with Joseph under the cover of night.
In the year 1887, a book was published in Russia which rocked the Christian world. It was vilified and condemned. It was called The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. The writer, Nicholas Notovich, was a respected journalist. Notovich claimed his book was a factual report of a trip he made to the Himalayan mountains in remote northern India. Notovich may well have been the first outsider to make his way to Hemis, an isolated Buddhist monastery hidden high in the Asian mountaintops. Gaining the confidence of an elderly monk, he was shown ancient scrolls which tell the story of a scholar and prophet named Issa. In these secret records, Issa is described as a foreigner from a small Mediterranean country. The stranger arrived in India as a teenage boy to study the teachings of the Buddha. And according to the scrolls, he lived here 500 years after the prophet Buddha died, a time that coincides exactly with the lost years of Jesus. Nicholas Notovich was convinced that Issa was Jesus of Nazareth, and that he carried back to his homeland the principles of Buddhism. Half a century after Notovich was in Hemis in 1902, a Hindu priest sought refuge in the same remote Indian monastery. He too translated the scrolls and published a work. His translation verifies the work of Notovich.
Ancient writings do exist from both Persia as well as India that Jesus did indeed travel to India, but we do not have 100% proof that he was there. The proof, however, does lie in his teachings when compared to sacred Buddhist writings.
The authenticated ancient scrolls found at the Hemis monastery near Leh in Kashmir document the life of Saint Issa, leaving home at the age of 13, joining a merchant caravan, traveling the Silk Route, and arriving in India at the age of 14. The Egyptian word for Jesus is Isu, the Greek word is Iesus, and the Arabic word for Jesus is Isa. Issa continued his travels through India and Tibet and the holy cities, where Brahmin priests taught him to read and understand the Vedas. He learned Pali and studied the sacred sutras and how to cure by aid of prayer. He began teaching, performing miracles, and explaining the holy scriptures in monasteries and market bazaars. As an adult, Issa finally left India and Tibet and traveled to Alexandria, Egypt. Why Alexandria? Because that's where Issa, whose previous name was Caesarion, grew up. That's where he last saw his mother, Cleopatra, alive. Issa spent 3 years in Egypt before searching for his younger half-sister and 2 younger half-brothers fathered by Mark Antony. They had inherited land in Syria. Despite false rumors of their early deaths, historians confirm that Caesarion and his 2 half-brothers mysteriously vanished from the historical record. Did they really vanish, or did they just reappear in the biblical record? According to the Bible, 2 of Jesus' 12 disciples were named James and Thomas. The Bible identifies James and Thomas as full brothers. Jesus, on the other hand, is identified as their half-brother. Thomas is not only identified as Jesus' younger half-brother, he is also called Jesus' twin. But how could Thomas possibly be Jesus' younger half-brother and his twin at the same time? The historical records show that Cleopatra had 3 children fathered by Mark Antony. Two of them were a twin boy and girl. Isa Caesarion clearly had a younger half-brother who is also a twin. At the scene of the crucifixion, there were two Marys present. One was Mary of Bithynia. When Roman Emperor Octavian invaded Egypt, Cleopatra sent her 13-year-old son Caesarion to India with Mary of Bithynia and Mary's wealthy uncle-husband named Joseph of Arimathea. Since Caesarion was the true heir to the Roman Empire, Emperor Octavian wanted him killed. Mary and Joseph became Caesarion's adoptive parents and later his loyal disciples. The second Mary present at the crucifixion was Jesus' younger half-sister, Mary Magdalene, whose birth name was Selene. She is also identified in the Bible as Mary of Cleopas, meaning Mary of Cleopatra. Selene was the orphan daughter of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, who both committed suicide. After being captured by Emperor Octavian, Selene was raised in Octavian's royal household with her two brothers and with Octavian's son, Tiberius, who became the next Roman emperor. They were raised together by the emperor's sister, Octavia. Selene eventually married and became the Queen of Mauritania. Like her mother Cleopatra, Selene wore the headdress of the goddess Isis. Selene's half-brother Caesarion finally returned to Egypt after 17 years in hiding. He searched for Selene and found her. He was now called Jesus Christ, a name with the same initials as his father, J.C., for Julius Caesar. He told Selene about his plan to capture his father's kingdom, the Roman Empire, which Emperor Octavian had stolen from him. He told her he would capture it not with weapons and armies, but by creating a new religion and transforming the Roman Empire into the Holy Roman Empire. Selene agreed to join her brother's spiritual revolution. She changed her name from Selene to Magdalene by adding the word Magda to her name, which means high place in Hebrew. Jesus Caesarion also searched for and found his two half-brothers, one of whom was Selene's twin. His nickname was Thomas Didymus, which means twin in Greek and Hebrew. 17 years after her suicide, Cleopatra's 4 children were all reunited again. Why are the pages of the Bible silent about where Jesus was and what he did for 17 years from the age of 13 to 30?
Perhaps the most unusual legend of the missing years recounts a journey that would have taken Jesus thousands of miles from Nazareth. He would have traveled across 2 seas to England, a land whose history would become intertwined with Christian mythology. To this day in southern England, in Cornwall, villagers speak of Jesus having once walked here. Beneath these rolling meadows, the earth is laced with kin. 2,000 years ago, the story goes, the gospel character Joseph of Arimathea came to England to trade for the precious metal. And according to the legend, he brought with him his nephew, Jesus of Nazareth. At that time, ancient England was inhabited by the pagan Celts. Their religious leaders, the Druids, believed they were descended from a divine being. They also believed in an immortal soul. Some people in these valleys speculate that the Druids adapted their pagan religion to Christianity, not because they had heard stories of the Messiah, but because they had seen him. However, most scholars believe that it was the conquering Romans who arrived 2 centuries later who would convert the Druids to Christianity by persuasion and genocide. Since they were first found in a desert cave in 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls have fueled speculation about the life of Jesus. Was he a member of the religious community which wrote the scrolls? They were found at Qumran, an easy walk from the very spot where it is said Jesus was baptized by John. The scrolls detail the beliefs of a Jewish sect called the Essenes, a group that flourished during the lifetime of Jesus. The beliefs of the Essenes often seem to mirror the teachings of Jesus.
Zealots.
Jesus' band of revolutionaries included not only the Essenes, but a violent Hebrew terrorist group called the Zealots, who evolved into today's Zionists.
We're going to a wedding.
There is speculation that Jesus married his half-sister, Mary Magdalene. The Bible describes a wedding party in which Jesus uses his godly powers to magically turn water into wine for the party guests. Why did the Bible fail to name the names of the bride and groom at the wedding party? Is it because the names of the bride and groom were Jesus and Mary Magdalene? Since Jesus Caesarean learned the art of healing and meditation in India, and since he was provided with a foot support to stand on the cross, and since he was taken down from the cross after only 6 hours, and since he was treated with expensive royal healing oils, did he survive the wounds of his crucifixion? Since Jesus and his wealthy Hebrew relatives all knew about Jesus' arrest and crucifixion in advance, was it planned, along with stories of his resurrection, to convert the Roman Empire into the Holy Roman Empire?
My Lord and my God!
Like his father Julius Caesar, who was officially elevated to the status of God, Jesus Caesarean was not only elevated to the status of God, he recaptured his father's kingdom and expanded the Holy Hebrew Empire all the way to Great Britain and the United States of America.
What then, little king?
A review of royal genealogy charts confirms that today, Israel, Great Britain, and the United States are all ruled by descendants of the Hebrew tribes of Israel. The big question is, if Caesarean was born in 47 BC, how could Caesarean possibly be Jesus? Jesus was born in the year 0, wasn't he? To begin with, the year 0 does not exist on today's Gregorian Christian calendar, which jumps from 1 BC to 1 AD. Experts confirm a 7-year error was made in converting from the Egyptian to the Roman to the Christian calendar. The only way to calculate Jesus' real age is from a Bible quote which states that Jesus was baptized in the 15th year of the reign of Emperor Tiberius. Since Tiberius grew up in Octavia's royal household with Caesarean's half-sister and brothers, that means Caesarean was very close in age to Tiberius, who was born in 3 BC. By comparing important dates in the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian holy books, there is a margin of error of at least 30 years. So what proof is there that Caesarean's half-sister Selene is in fact Mary Magdalene? They were both wealthy, they both shared the same names, they were both Hebrew, and they both lived in the same place at the same time under the same Roman rulers. convincing proof lies in a famous New York statue. The Statue of Liberty was financed, built, and delivered to New York Harbor as a gift from the French Grand Orient Temple Masons in 1886, with a commemorative plaque for all to see. The statue has nothing whatsoever to do with liberty. Its designer was French Freemason Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, who traveled extensively throughout Egypt. Bartholdi was silent about who the woman was that served as his inspiration for the statue, but there is only one woman whose face closely matches the uniquely masculine features of the Statue of Liberty, Caesarion's half-sister, Selene. Bartholdi used the ancient busts and minted coins of Cleopatra Selene as his models in designing the Statue of Liberty. By comparing a digitized photograph of the Statue of Liberty with a bust of Cleopatra Selene, the matching identity of Mary Magdalene and Selene becomes clear. The lips, the mouth, the sharp jaw, the thick neck, the protruding ears, the prominent nose, and the masculine features are a close match. An ancient minted coin of Cleopatra Selene reveals that even her hairstyle and hair tie ribbons are an identical match with the Statue of Liberty's hairstyle and ribbons. The Statue of Liberty was intentionally designed to appear pregnant beneath the folds of her robe. The implication is that Mary Magdalene had children. Their names were Tamar and Jesus the Justice, whom the Merovingians, British royalty, and elite brotherhood of Freemasons claimed to be descendants of. With the blur of confusing Judases, Thomases, Jameses, Marys, and Josephs found in the Bible, many researchers have been challenged by the Bible's name game and its who's who mysteries. One way of decoding the Bible is to profile the main cast of characters and create a royal genealogy chart. The connection between the lives of the main Bible characters and the lives of real, historical figures line up like answers in a crossword puzzle. Far from being poor and uneducated, Jesus' inner circle of family and disciples were well-educated and well-off descendants of royalty. The disciple called Nicodemus of Bethany was in reality the son of Nicomedes IV of Bithynia. Joseph of Arimathea was in reality Joseph of Judea, an extremely wealthy tin merchant and descendant of King Zedekiah and Mattathias. The Virgin Mary of Bethany was in reality Mary of Bithynia and wife of her rich uncle Joseph of Judea. Mary Magdalene, Jesus of Nazareth, Thomas, and James were the wealthy royal offspring of Hebrew-Egyptian Ptolemy queen Cleopatra VII. Why did the Bible alter and even omit key historical names and dates? To cover up the real Hebrew identities of the royal ruling families of Egypt and the Holy Roman Empire, whose secret religion was and still is the cult of Amun. Why in the world did first-century Jews living at the time of Jesus threaten to punish by death anyone who dared to copy, sculpt, or draw the face of Jesus and his graven image? What were they afraid of? Were they afraid perhaps he might be recognized for who he really was?